Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swing and a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Welcome on, Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matt Moreno. Matt, just another week, normal week in Dodger land. 2 out of 3 from the Padres. Best record in baseball, 118 win pace. Is this going to be the intro every week this season?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to take anything for granted, but it does sort of seem like it. Obviously, we know the kind of talent the Dodgers have, and like we've touched, they're off to this really strong start, and it's impressive when you consider their lineup. You still have, we sort of expected to be hitting well, haven't quite done it.
Yeah.
Some of the pitchers haven't, maybe reached their peak level that we maybe might see in May or June or later in the year. So, it's impressive. Obviously, they lost 2 or 3 to the Rockies, and there were some complaints about a slow start and a disappointing start. And you look at it now, and here they are with the best record.
Yeah, it is funny to look back on that Rocky series and some folks who overreacted. I'm thankful to say you and I did not overreact, that we were not worried about how this was going to play out. But we'll get more into this. But I think you make a great point in that normally when a team goes on a stretch where, you win 11 out of 15, something like that, you expect to be like, oh, yeah, and Freddie Freeman's hitting .550 with 7 home runs over that stretch. There's actually nobody tearing the cover off the ball, really. There's guys playing up to their potential. I think the bullpen, as we'll get into, has been elite and maybe overperforming as a group. But aside from that, I mean, starting pitching has been really good, but from the guys that you'd kind of expect, maybe it's a little more Tyler Anderson than we expected for performance-wise. But I think that's the encouraging thing. Because, again, I'm like, wow, the Dodgers are playing great. And then you think, like, it's a 118 win pace. So it's not like a completely unsustainable win pace. And when I see the way that the team is playing, I don't know. I'm not saying they're going to win 120 games this year, but I'm just saying they have the talent, surely, if they can stay healthy, which they've mostly been able to do, even with Andrew Heaney, Blake Treinen, and a couple of their key pitchers on the injured list. Well, here's the plan for today. Matt and I are going to do some reactions to that Padres-Dodgers series. Again, they take 2 out of 3 down in San Diego. We're going to do a little stock up, stock down over the last week to 2 weeks. Who are some guys trending up? Who are some guys trending down? Whether or not we think those are trends that are going to be sustained moving forward. We'll talk about the division. I think it's worth talking about. Are the Rockies for real? Are the Giants for real? What do we make of the Padres and Diamondbacks? And then finally, the Dodgers have a 3-game set in Arizona that's coming up. So we'll do a little bit of preview, pitching matchups, and stuff like that. But Matt, let's talk Dodgers and Padres. They take 2 out of 3. Again, a big series. We know the Dodgers love to go down to San Diego. If you had to kind of sum up a headline from that series, what would you pick?
I mean, like you kind of said at the opening of the show, just sort of more of the same. I mean, obviously heading into that series, you looked at the pitching matchups and just the teams in general. Padres are with Tatis right now. Their lineup had, Machado and Hosmer were hitting well. You still sort of expected the Dodgers to take 2 of 3, and that's, what it ended up being, obviously. And in terms of just going down to San Diego, it's always a fun, even though you touched on in our preview for it, it didn't have the same sort of excitement and feel of last year when, the Padres were perceived as a real World Series contender and, excuse me, significant threat to the Dodgers in the NL West. But the fans still showed up. Petco Park actually set a attendance record for a 3-game series. I don't have the exact number. I think it was over like 130,000 fans. We tweeted it out yesterday. And the mark that it broke was from 2000, coincidentally, was when the Dodgers were also in town.
Yeah.
So,
shocking.
Obviously, yeah, it's been well documented how much Dodger fans travel, and especially down to San Diego.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I would imagine that's probably the second most popular park as far as games that Dodger fans get to. It's such a short drive. It's a pretty park. We usually feel pretty good about going down there knowing there's going to be lots of Dodger fans, knowing that the Dodgers have historically owned the Padres, that kind of thing. And, obviously the Giants, we're not saying the Padres are the biggest rivals, so don't hear us there. But it's just an easier trip in a number of ways. I'm sure lots of people make their way up to the Giants, but it's a further trip. You kind of got to make some extra plans. And, I think there's probably a little more animosity in San Francisco there is in San Diego. Do you think that's a fair assessment as far as, like, fan-to-fan animosity?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's increased in San Diego a little bit, just one from, the Padres' expectations, and then related to that, then falling short of those expectations. So then frustration sort of building up. But would agree with you. And also, San Diego, you could go down for the day and come right back home. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I look at a headline from this series, my headline is kind of like, what's real? You have two guys that the Dodgers have desperately been wanting to get going, Mookie Betts and Cody Bellinger. Both of them have sort of breakout games, and yet both of them sort of surround those breakout games with more of what we expected, more of what we've seen, not what we expected. So Mookie Betts starts out the series 2 home runs. You and I are doing the post-game show. We're like, hey, is this it? Is it going to click? Well, he goes 1 for 8 the rest of the series. Cody Bellinger, the exact opposite of that. He goes 1 for 8 the first 2 games of the series, comes back and hits 2 home runs in the third one. I'm not here to make predictions about what's real and what's not real in this case, but I'm just looking in that and saying, I don't know. I think it's a to be determined. You like to see the 2 home runs because, for a lot of different reasons, Bellinger off a lefty, we're going to get into that. Mookie Betts, finding some power, which has been lacking. It's nice to see those things, but for me, it's sort of a what's sustainable. I'm going to look back on this series and say, was this a mirage? Was the Mookie Betts 2 home run game just sort of a flash in the pan? Or was that the start of something, even if the next 2 games sort of it came out? I mean, do you feel like you learned anything about maybe those? Again, we're going to get into Bellinger, so maybe we'll do the Mookie Betts thing here. Like, you and I talked Friday. He hits the 2 home runs. He goes 1 for 8 from there on out. Did you see anything on Saturday and Sunday that made you believe the 2 home runs was either a fluke or real?
I didn't know. Not. I will say on Sunday he at least drew multiple walks. Saturday was obviously rough because I think he was hitless and ended up with it might have been 4 strikeouts, which he hasn't done often in his career. So that was disappointing to see him obviously follow up the 2 with that kind of performance. But I think at some point he will sort of get going. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be like a huge spike in production all of a sudden. I think it'll kind of have to be sort of steady improvements where he has a 1 for 3 with a walk and then maybe a 2 for 4 game with a couple hits.
Yeah, all right. Matt's videos doing all sorts of funky things on us here, so we'll get that figured out. But let's move on, Matt, to stock up and stock down. I'll let you go first here. We're sort of picking some guys that have had have had some success or have had some failures, and kind of asking the question of, is this sustainable? Do we expect this trend to continue? So while I figure out some video stuff here, I'll let you go first. Who you got for your first stock up and stock down?
My first one is Cody Bellinger. I think he's stock up. And, I know, like you just said, he kind of had a slow start to the series before his 2 home runs. But I think we've seen enough that he continues to just be sort of on the right trajectory, and maybe not necessarily the home runs, but at least the at-bat quality and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, will he have several multi-home run games this season? I'm not necessarily predicting that, but as you and I have sort of stressed, all he really needs to be is basically, league average. And that would be a huge improvement last season and more than enough what the Dodgers need. And obviously, if he exceeds that, they certainly would take it. But it's not something that they need with how deep their lineup is.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the for Bellinger, the lefty off lefty thing is significant. The fact that he got it off of Minaya, who is a very, very good pitcher. I think all those are positive signs in the Cody Bellinger camp. And so, yeah, I mean, as far as, do you think did you see something that feels sustainable to you on that front?
I think his at-bat quality has just improved overall this. And yes, there've been, he'll have his game where he goes hitless with a couple strikeouts, but he at least is competing now, whereas you couldn't necessarily during spring training. I mean, those at-bats were rough, and it was, pitchers that we weren't necessarily going to see on major league rosters. But now, he may strike out, but part he is putting together much better at bats, and I think that ultimately will lend to positive results over the course of a full season.
Yeah, and I've talked, at the beginning of the year, the StatCast stuff, and it's all small sample size, but it was not good. I mean, it was bottom half of the league, bottom third of the league, percentile-wise. That has trended up. And, I just tweeted it out. Like, look, this lineup, if Bellinger gets going, is like it's going to be insane. It's going to be insane because we know 1 through 9 how deep it is, but the depth at the bottom was like, Gavin Lux, Cody Bellinger, maybe even Chris Taylor, who are like very good to very good hitters, but we're not talking about elite hitters. If Cody Bellinger can even sniff, if he can get back not to his MVP level, but he was putting up seasons where he's 15 to 20% above league average as an offensive player. If Bellinger can do that, like you said, if he hits 240 but can get to 30 home runs or something like that, it's going to be an absolute wrap. for this offense. I mean, this is the best offense in baseball right now. They're scoring the most runs, and we've said a lot of these guys are not necessarily playing to their potential. So stock up for Cody Bellinger. I think 2 home runs. He's a confidence guy, like more so than Mookie. I think for me, Cody hits 2 home runs in a game. I think that's actually going to have a meaningful impact moving forward because he's going to act and go in there confidently. I think Mookie is more of a methodical guy where he's not necessarily swayed by results nearly as much, good or bad, which is I don't know, probably a better thing than the ups and downs of Cody Bellinger. And yet when Bellinger gets going, you'd like to see that wave continue. First one for me, I'm going to go stock down. It's a guy that I've kind of touched on a little bit. I did a little bit more digging, but it's actually Justin Turner. He's been struggling this season, and he's one of a handful of guys. I think Turner, Muncy, Taylor have all sort of been struggling, but when I look at those 3 and do a little digging on the numbers, Turner's the one I'm most concerned about because the StatCast stuff is concerning. If you look at Taylor, if you look at Muncy, those guys are barreling balls. They're at least near league average on exit velocity, hard hit percent, that kind of thing. Justin Turner is not. Justin Turner is in the 9th percentile in barreling baseballs up right now. He's in the 30th percentile for exit velocity, 32nd percentile for hard hit percentage. Even his walk rate is below average, 47th percentile for walk rate, 17th percentile in expected slugging. I'm not here to say that Justin Turner, like, this is a wrap. This is what we're going to see going forward. But what I will say is he's 37. When guys start to drop off, it typically does not happen gradually over time. It typically, you wake up one day and all of a sudden, for one reason or another, it's not clicking. So I'm not at all saying Justin Taylor is done. Please don't mishear me. What I am saying with Justin Taylor is I'm keeping an eye out. Because if this trend continues, and we've talked, early season stuff, no spring training, yada, yada, yada. If this trend continues, I'm going to be concerned because I don't have the same confidence that if this lasts for another month to 6 weeks, that, oh, don't worry, he'll figure it out when the lights come on. Because typically 37-and-a-half-year-olds don't just snap out of 3-month-long slumps.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I've touched, in terms of level of concern, whether for Turner or just other players on the roster, it really won't come until maybe we're 1 month or 6 weeks into the season. I think for me, what's been concerning with him is his strikeouts. That's been a little, I think, along with some of the other issues that you brought up. I will say on Sunday against the Padres, I felt like he did have better at bats, and when he did have his hits, he was going the other way, which we have seen from him.
Yeah.
So hopefully, those are positive signs of him starting to emerge from his early season slump. But yeah, I mean, in terms of level of concern, I am with you. Another few weeks, I think we'll have to kind of start wondering, where he may sort of settle by the end of the year.
And it'll be interesting to see, what does Edwin Rios look like? Because if Edwin Rios keeps putting together pretty solid at bats, if he can get the batting average up, start showing some power. I'm not saying there's going to be a controversy in the DH spot or at third base, but I'm just saying I think the Dodgers potentially could have some guys on that bench that you actually like offensively. If a guy like Jake Lamb or Kevin Pillar or Michael Busch, if one of those guys ends up on the roster, could they be competing for some at-bats where we see less and less of Justin Turner? I don't know. TBD. Again, I'm not penciling that in. I'm just saying keep an eye out. Just keep that on the back burner, see what's going on. All right, number 2 for you, stock up, stock down is who?
Stock up, I'm going to go Freddie Freeman. And again, it might sound funny to say because it's not like he's coming from a bad point, a bad starting point at all. But what I sort of keep going back to is that now starting to see some of the power from him. And obviously he had another home run off a left-hander, no less, just like Cody Bellinger. Yeah. And Freeman doesn't have this necessarily the same struggles that Bellinger did hitting same-side pitching. But Sean Manaea went into that start. Lefties were 0 for 12 against him this season. And so Freeman obviously sort of did something right. And I think, we expect him to sort of hit the ball the other way and do all that stuff. But the minute now that he's adding power to it, it just makes him kind of the more complete hitter that you sort of expect him to be.
Is there anybody in baseball when they make solid contact, like perfect contact? If every guy made perfect contact, I might take Freddie Freeman's swing. I mean, Bellinger's another guy that's probably in that conversation. I think there's a lefty thing that it looks sweet. But my goodness, that ball he took off Manaea, it was like inside. He got the barrel so far out in front of it, and it was just so smooth. It almost looked like it was just literal perfection as far as contact on the bat. I mean, is there a guy that you like seeing just barrel up a ball more than Freddie Freeman?
I mean, I don't necessarily like seeing it, but I would put, maybe like somebody like Mike Trout up at the top of that list, because I think when he gets a hold of one, also like the ball just jumps off his bat. But if in terms of what I prefer to watch, it would definitely be Freeman. But yeah, I mean, he's near the top.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lefty thing that's just more pretty. I mean, Buxton is another guy. He put out a walk-off home run at like 470 feet or something yesterday. So I'm sure we'll have somebody in the comments talking about Austin Barnes and his 430-foot home run. Maybe that's the guy that you like to see the most. I don't know. But all right, so number 2 for you. So you got Bellinger stock up. You got Freeman stock up. I'm going to go another stock down. Don't worry, my third one's going to be positive. Not all negative Nancy over here. But Gavin Lux, another guy that I'm not burying the guy, just like Justin Turner. I'm just saying keep an eye on it. Gavin Lux, 1 for his last 15 over the last 5 games. Obviously missed a couple games with a back injury of some sort in there. He did draw 4 walks, so he reached base 5 of his last 19 times, so that's not the end of the world. But he has no extra base hits. For me, the reason that it's a stock down is obviously the 1 for 15, but this is what I'm curious about. Gavin Lux has struggled to break out of slumps. I think we have seen him in stretches of his career where he does really, really well, but then as soon as he kind of has like an extended struggle season, I think that's where it feels like maybe he's a little bit like Cody Bellinger, where he gets in his head and it gets mental. But I'm just watching. I'd like to see the at-bat quality stay. Again, 4 walks and 19 plate appearances is pretty good. I mean, that's good. Like if that's 2 to 3 hits and he's 7 for 19 as far as reaching base, then all of a sudden there's nothing to see here. But I'm just curious to see if he can snap out of it a little bit, because I do feel like for a young guy whose confidence has been tested, he was a top 5 prospect. He has not really put a sustained level of success together at the major league level. Can he snap out of it? I'm keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, it's definitely a fair question. I think what's working in his favor this time is, one, he sort of has experience going through those struggles, so maybe it's not necessarily the first time. Obviously, he was a top prospect, tore the cover off the ball in the minor leagues, then you get to the majors, and it's sort of the in his life probably that he struggled to that extent. So I think that will sort of help. And I think another factor too is he doesn't necessarily need to look over his shoulder and wonder, like, am I going to be in the lineup, right? Like, he's one way or another, he's pretty much starting and playing on a regular basis. So I think will help sort of maybe potentially lend to getting out of it, because he, like we've touched on in our other videos, he is someone who has admitted that he needs sort of regular at-bats because of the timing and rhythm of his swing to sort of stay in place. So I agree with you. Keep an eye on him, but there are reasons to believe, this situation could be different and he could pull himself
By
out.
the way, real quick, I love the guy that's like, you know what, my problem is I just need regular at bats. Like, I just need to play every day. It's like, yeah, you think like, it's like the major league players, like, you know what I need to break out of this slump? Hey, coach, just give me 3-4 days off every week. I want to play less. Actually, that's the case. So, I mean, I think he's right. I'm not arguing with it. It's just funny when you hear a player say it. It's like, oh, really? Top 5 prospect who hasn't gotten major league playing time a ton. You want to play every day? Okay, got it. But I agree. I do think the fact that he's not looking over his shoulder from a playing time perspective is good. I think the fact that he put together a sustained run of success before that is going to help and work in his favor as well. So I've got Gavin Lux and Justin Turner in a stock down category, but also just keep an eye on things. Keep an eye on things over the next couple weeks, see where this goes. All right, last one for you. Stock up, stock down. Who you got?
I'm going stock down for Walker Buehler, and again, it's not so much that he's overly struggling by any means. It's just he hasn't necessarily pitched to the level we sort of expect, and in some sense, it's certainly understandable with the shortened spring training, and it's still early in the year. But I thought we were going to see a little bit more of a traditional Buehler start against Max Fried and the Braves. As much as you and I agree, he's somebody who kind of himself and has learned when he needs to dial it back to 85-90%. But I thought a game like the Braves, we would have seen him turn it up a little bit. One, because it's obviously an NLCS rematch, and two, because you're going against Max Fried, who's another quality pitcher on the other side, and those are moments that we have Buehler sort of relish in. But he's still kind of it's kind of an average start for him. So that's why, again, like, it's not completely like I'm not overly concerned. I think he'll reverse his trend, but just currently that's where I would place him.
It's so funny. One of the things that I've appreciated about doing this show, because it's like we do this every week. And so I spend a lot more time on the week-to-week small increments of evaluating guys than I probably normally would as a fan. I'm not looking at like month-long or 6-month-long trends. But the reason we do a segment like Stock Up and Stock Down every couple of weeks is because it forces you to look at like what has this guy done in the last week to 2 weeks and how do each of these segments kind of stack together throughout the season? And I remember the first 2 to 3 months of last year, I was very concerned about Walker Buehler because the results were there, but the StatCast numbers were not. All of the peripherals were pointing in a direction that was saying, hey, there might be a reason for concern. Now, what I learned is that Buehler just sort of warmed himself up into the season and then turned it on. And so it wasn't that those numbers were inaccurate. It just, they weren't a predictor of what the future was going to be because he was going to turn it on eventually. And so that's probably why with Buehler, I watch him and I'm like, yeah, it just looks like a guy who's throwing 85%. It looks like a guy who's just not trying to dial up. He's trying to protect himself, play the long game, which is totally fine. And by the way, it's hilarious that Walker Buehler's 85% is still this good. It's still very consistent. It's still very solid. He's not going to win a Cy Young pitching at the level he is right now necessarily, but he's going to be sustainable, you'd like to think. So I totally get it on the Buehler piece there. I mean, do you get that sense? Like, are you say you're confident he's going to turn it around. Are you seeing what I'm seeing where it just feels like he's kind of like got it dialed down to 8 or 9 instead of up to 10 this early in the year?
I think that's probably fair. For me, it just feels, I put my finger on it, but he's definitely searching for something. You know, in his last start against the Braves, he changed his windup to stop raising his hands over his head, which he's sort of done in the past. He's very much a feel pitcher. I mean, he'll things from start to start, which not everybody is comfortable.
Yeah,
but he will. If it's not working for him, he'll change it. So you know, it's I'm just not concerned. Again, it's a snapshot of just where he's at right now.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, number 3 for me. It's going to be sort of a group and an individual one here. I'm gonna give the bullpen as a whole a shout out. I mean, I feel like a broken record every time we talking about our bullpen. Against the Padres, 13 1/3 innings, 1 earned run, just 9 base runners, 12 strikeouts. They've been absolutely dominant, absolutely lights out. I'll give 2 honorable mentions here. Brusdar Graterol, 5 2/3 so far this season, 0 earned runs. Not as many strikeouts still, only 5 strikeouts and 5 2/3. Does have 3 walks. He's kind of the only guy in the bullpen that struggles with walks, but he's allowed just 2 hits. I feel like it's not necessarily a big enough story that Brusdar Graterol seems to have figured something out because of his stuff and how nasty he is. But the problem is, even like Brusdar Graterol, as good as he has been, is still the 3rd, maybe 4th best relief pitcher the Dodgers have had this year. So something to keep an eye on. Daniel Hudson, a guy that I keep pounding the table for. I'm like, pay attention, people, to how good this guy is. 5 2/3 innings, 3 hits, no walks, no earned runs, 8 strikeouts. He's been lights out. But both of those guys fall behind the real stock up that I've got, and it's Evan Phillips. His first appearance of the season this year, 1 inning pitched, 2 earned runs. Since then, 5 1/3 innings pitched, 0 hits, 0 walks, 6 strikeouts. He's retired 17 in a row. He's striking out more than a batter an inning. He's not walking anybody. And oh, by the way, as much as his slider is moving something like 12 inches from one direction to the other, his fastball, which averaged 95.4 miles an hour last season, is up. We've seen him touch 97, even 98 on the gun. This is a guy, as you and I have pointed out, he's out of options. If you follow Dodger stuff, you've heard that phrase with Evan Phillips every single time his name is mentioned. We thought when the bullpen crunch comes that he might be the odd man out. Surely they could trade him, maybe get something for him. At this point, there is a 0% chance the Dodgers are going to move on from Evan Phillips because not only is he a useful part of this bullpen, he might be, right now, the way he's pitching, one of the better relief pitchers in all of baseball.
Yeah, definitely. I think to me, more so than, I mean, the fact that he's retired 16 batters is certainly impressive, but that eventually will be broken, right?
Yeah.
I mean, every relief pitcher, has, allows a walk or a hit, whatever the case may be. So what's more encouraging, and I think what is better to look at for his long-term success is, like you said, the fastball velocity is up in the slider.
Yeah.
And, as for the roster stuff, I think what will end up happening is we're going to see somebody like Phil Bickford, who is very good in his own right, get optioned to Oklahoma City just because they don't have room for him right now.
Yeah.
And, that's just sort of how things are going to be. Like you said, Evan Phillips really isn't going anywhere, which coming into the season, we both agreed he might end up being an odd man out. But yeah, I mean, not anymore. And with Graterol, credit to him. I think he's benefiting from incorporating into mix this season. And it's encouraging. The strikeouts, obviously, in a perfect world, he would have more of them. Maybe they get there by the end of the year. But if not, he seems to be inducing sort of weak contact and preventing runs, obviously, which ultimately, the Dodgers will take.
Yeah, I was trying to look up what Evan Phillips. I mean, we know he's out of options. He's 27 years old. I'm curious, kind of what his long-term status is with the Dodgers. I can't figure out how many more years of control they have for him. But I mean, like, I'm just thinking he could be a guy who is sort of a long-term piece of the Dodgers bullpen. You know, because a guy like Hudson, as good as he's been, he's getting up there in age. And he's a guy who is on a 1-year contract, I believe. Obviously, a lot of these other guys have a bunch of years of team control. We'll see. I'll try and figure out if I could find it eventually. But the bullpen, I mean, as a whole, has been fantastic. Is there anybody else from the bullpen that jumps out to you? I mentioned 3 guys, Phillips, Gratterall, and Hudson. Is there anybody else from that group that you're like, you've been impressed with?
I'll cheat a little bit and say Tyler Anderson. Obviously, he's in the rotation right now because of Heaney's injury, but I was definitely impressed by his first 2 relief appearances. And the first one at Coors Field, I wasn't sure if maybe it was just a flash in the pan, maybe it was just a good appearance, but then he followed up with another strong piggyback situation with Gonsolin, and then frankly even his start against the Padres. I mean, like I said, going into that, if he allowed a couple runs over 4 or 5 innings, you would absolutely take that, and that's pretty much what it ended up being. So I think collectively, whether as a starter or relief pitcher, he's just pitching well, and I imagine he'll end up back in the bullpen once Heaney is able to return, and so that would just that'll further strengthen the group again.
Yeah. Here you go on Evan Phillips. I love the Dodgers. The Dodgers are the best sometimes. He doesn't start arbitration until 2024. So
I figured it was at least a year off.
Yeah, so he is 27 now. He is under team control. He'll be making the minimum in 2023. Arbitration in 2024. Arbitration in 2025. Arbitration in 2026. So this is where you feel for a guy like Evan Phillips because, look, unfortunately, he's not going to hit free agency until he's 32. So for a guy like him, the big contract is never coming. Which is unfortunate for him. And I'm not trying to diminish any of that. It's great news if you're a Dodger fan, especially as a reliever, because in arbitration, he's making $720,000 this year. Okay. So we're not going to feel super, super bad for a guy making $720,000 playing Major League Baseball. But if you kind of just do the math between these 2 years and the 3 years of arbitration, you're talking about a guy that over a 5-year stretch is probably going to make around $6 to $7 million at the most. And then he'll hit free agency as a 32-year-old, who knows what. But that just goes to show you why the Dodgers will not be moving on from Evan Phillips, because they have a guy that does this under team control for the next 4 or 5 years. And as you said, they can unfortunately option a guy like Phil Bickford, unfortunately for him. Even some of these, Alex Vesia, as good as he has been and as good as he is, he's a guy that has options. They have guys they can move. Clevenger is a guy, obviously, who's going to be up and down a bunch. You get the sense. Brule, I believe, can be optioned as well, because some of these guys, like Tommy Kahnle, when he comes back, he won't be able to be optioned. And so the Dodgers will have to figure out some of that stuff there. So, all right, let's move on to our next segment here. Let's talk a little bit about the National League West. The National League West, the headline here is it's loaded. The Dodgers have the best record in baseball according to win percentage. The Giants are third, and the Rockies, yes, the Rockies are fourth. Padres, as far as in the win column, are among the best with 10, but they do have 7 losses. And so before we get to the Giants, Matt, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. Are the Colorado Rockies for real? Let me go through their schedule, kind of some of their key players. You tell me what you think. This is a team that has won 2 games in every single series they have played so far. They took 2 of 3 from the Dodgers, 2-game sweep of the Rangers, 2 of 4 from the Cubs, 2 of 3 from the Phillies, 2 of 3 from the Tigers. They are second in batting average. They are 8th in runs per game. They're 23rd in ERA. You look at some of their key performers. CJ Cron has 6 home runs. Connor Joe, former Dodger player, great story. 327 batting average himself. And even Chris Bryant hitting about 280. So that is good. The flip side is the Rockies were 74 and 87 last year. They lost Trevor Story, replaced him with Chris Bryant. What do you make of the Rockies? I mean, we obviously saw them up close and personal. They're the only team to have beaten the Dodgers in a series this year. It's early. It's the Rockies. Are you buying any piece of what the Rockies have done this season?
Honestly, it's tough to do so because, like you said, we saw them obviously play the Dodgers in the first series of the season, and nothing really impressed me or wowed me with their team. But, I mean, you have to give them credit for what they've done so far. I just don't know. Their pitching has always sort of been their Achilles heel, and so I don't know if, their ERA already is 23rd. I don't necessarily see it improving.
Yeah.
So if you view it from that lens, then at some point you feel like that's going to catch up to them, because as we've seen with the Dodgers, you could have a very deep and talented lineup, but the offense isn't always going to score 4, 5, 6 runs every day.
Yeah.
So, it's tough to buy into them. But, maybe that'll be famous last words, because I expected the Giants last year to, sort of fall off because I couldn't understand how they were winning so much, and they never did.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see the same thing with the Rockies this year.
Yeah, here's the thing. So they beat the Rangers twice. The Rangers are maybe the worst team in baseball, 5-10. They took 2 out of 4 from the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs are 7-9. They took 2 out of 3 from the Phillies. The Phillies are 6-10. They took 2 out of 3 from the Detroit Tigers. The Detroit Tigers are 6-9. So none of those teams have a winning record. The Dodgers are the only team with a winning record they've played. Of course, they took 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers, though. So it's not like they got swept against a good team and beat the bad team. I think that I hear you. As a Dodger fan, you sort of have this PTSD over the Giants last year where we're all like, it's going to fade, it's going to fade, it's going to fade, it's going to fade. It never faded. And they're back again this year, by the way. The thing with the Giants, you look back on, you say, they have smart people running the organization. Like, while I doubted the talent that I was looking at, I never doubted Farhan Zaidi. Gabe Kapler, I think, as bad as it was the first time around as a major league manager, I think he has proven that he learned a ton. We knew he was in lockstep with the general manager, which is important. So I think you could look at that and say, how did the Giants happen last year? I could give you an answer to that question. Farhan Zaidi is really, really smart. He knows how to build a baseball team. Gabe Kapler is a very good manager. That's what happened. They picked guys, they found inefficiencies, and they capitalized on them. There's no part of the Rockies that fits that. Like, if the Rockies somehow finish 90-72, and somebody comes to me and says, Jeff, what happened with the Rockies? How do you explain that? I guarantee you, I will have no explanation. Because we know the front office is not smart. We know the manager has been the same guy that's been in place for a number of years. And, I mean, look, he's fine. Congrats, you have a major league job. But, like, he's not winning manager of the year. He's not an elite guy. So I look at this and I say, my answer are the Rockies for real? No. Because they've beaten a bunch of bad teams. I think it's fluky. It's early in the season. It's a small sample size. If you ask me, do I think the Rockies are going to finish over 500? My answer is going to be no. What do you say, Matt?
Ooh, that's tough. I'll say yes. I think
Wow.
they could get to. Well, it would be like 1 or 2 games over 500. Nothing, nothing crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, keep in mind, like to go under 500, they're only 5 games over 500 right now. So I'm only predicting them to have 6 more losses than they do wins for the rest of the season. And keep in mind, they're going to have a ton of games against the Dodgers, a ton of games against the Giants, a ton of games against the Padres. Yes, they also get a ton of games against the Diamondbacks, but that was not work in their favor. All right, let's talk Giants now. The Giants are 11-5. They're a half game back of the Dodgers in the division. They are the third best record in baseball. The Mets are 12-5, so they've got an extra win and an extra loss over the Dodgers, but have a higher winning percentage than the Giants. The Giants, you look through the schedule, 2 out of 3 from the Marlins, 2 out of 3 from the Padres, 3 out of 3 from the Guardians. They lose 3 out of 4 to the Mets. They sweep the Nats. They are 4th in runs per game. They are 2nd in ERA. Looking through some of their stats, how about old friend alert, Jock Peterson hitting .364 this year with 5 home runs. Brandon Belt has 4 home runs. The story, though, is pitching. Carlos Rodon, a guy that we talked about, a guy that I wanted the Dodgers to go after. When healthy, he's elite. He has been healthy. He has been elite. He's got a 1.06 ERA in 17 innings. Logan Webb's got an ERA under 3. Alex Wood's got an ERA of 2.5. After a full season of it last year, the same question I'll ask you, Matt, are the Giants for real?
I think so, and frankly, they have impressed me so far this season. I thought there would be a little bit of drop-off, especially losing Buster Posey to retirement, and maybe some of the older veterans who had career years last year. I thought maybe it's just been a flash in the pan, but credit to the Giants so far. I think what's interesting with them is kind of their biggest challenge on the schedule didn't go well for them, right, in the Mets. So that's something I think to monitor. But hey, similar to the Rockies, like you play who you play, and so if they were losing to the inferior opponents, you would be questioning them. So you just need to give them credit for taking care of business against those teams.
Yeah.
I guess I don't necessarily know if they'll sustain this winning percentage. Like I said, I kind of felt that way last season, and look at what ended up happening. Yeah. So we'll just have to see. I think another month of the year, the season, we'll have a better picture of maybe the caliber team they could be this year.
Yeah, Dodgers open next week against the Giants, a 2-game stretch. But as you said, I mean, they played the Mets, they played the Padres. Everybody else they've played so far has been under 500. I think Rodon's health is going to be a big deal for them. Desclafani has struggled in the pitching rotation thus far. Alex Wood, I mean, he's good. I don't know if he's going to sustain a 2.51 ERA. Actually, I feel pretty confident saying he won't sustain that. We've seen the Jock Peterson stretches. I think he's very good. Like, I'm not doubting Jock Peterson can be a good player. I'm not sure he's going to hit 365 with 5 home runs, keep up that pace throughout the year. But Logan Webb, we know, is an ace. 2.96 feels sustainable from his end. And so I'll just be curious to see how that starting pitching holds up over the course of the year. But I think there's a lot of teams in the league that are facing that. Quick note on the Padres. The Padres are 16th in runs per game so far this year, 15th in ERA, but they're missing Tatis, they're missing Snell, they're missing Clevenger. Snell and Clevenger, at least. I think Clevenger's really close to coming back. I think he's making like a third rehab start. Snell is starting to throw, so he's probably coming back in the next couple of months. Tatis, that whole thing is a disaster, but he should be coming back at some point. So are you worried about the Padres? Where do they fall in this category? Do you still have them third in the division once those guys get healthy?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not too concerned. I don't know. Something about them, like I just can't really see them putting it together enough to really compete in terms of postseason type thing. And I think they're certainly capable of, once they're healthy, of winning 2 of 3 against the Dodgers, against the Giants. But grand scheme of things, I don't necessarily see them really threatening at the top of the division.
Yeah, I mean, Machado's playing great, and they said it on the broadcast, which I think was a little surprising to me to remember that Machado's been incredibly durable. He plays a ton of games every single year, and he's actually been really consistent as far as a performer. He doesn't have the roller coaster, good year, bad year, good year, bad year, amazing year. He's been really, really good. He started out really well. That feels sustainable. I think the Eric Hosmer stuff is not sustainable. This is a guy that they wanted to move and nobody wanted him. So I think everybody's surprised that he's playing as well as he has been playing. But you get back Tatis, you get back Snell, you get back Clevenger, and that's not a team anybody's going to want to face in a meaningful series. And so we'll see. I still, if I'm going to make a bold prediction, I still think the Padres will finish ahead of the Giants. But who knows? I mean, if Snell and Tatis are out for as long as, for another couple of months and that gap continues to widen, that won't be a good-looking prediction on my end. All right, let's close it out. Let's look at the one team in the division we have not talked about yet. That's the Diamondbacks. The Dodgers travel to Arizona for a 3-game set for that one. Some numbers on the Diamondbacks. They are 28th in runs per game, which, based on if I told you to name 3 guys on the Diamondbacks lineup, that probably makes sense to you that they're 28th in runs per game. The thing that's a little bit surprising with them, they are 12th in ERA, so the pitching has been pretty good. And when you look at the rotation that the Dodgers are going to face this week, that kind of makes sense. The Diamondbacks are 6-10, but they do have some starting pitchers that you're worried about. They did just play the Mets. They kind of hung with them a little bit. As somebody that kept an eye on that series, they took 1 out of 3, but none of those games were blowouts. They were in them till the end in all of them. Concern for the Diamondbacks, Ketel Marte, who is probably their best player. He hit .318 with 14 home runs last year. He's hitting .167 with no home runs this year. That's a problem. Here's 2 guys you've never heard of before who have been playing well. Seth Beer, elite name, also an elite OPS, over 900 OPS this year and hitting .341. Is Seth Beer hitting .341 sustainable? I don't know. Color me skeptical. On that one, Pavin Smith, I recognize that name from last year. Couldn't tell you anything about Pavin Smith, but he's hitting .280 for the Diamondbacks. Christian Walker, Dalton Varsho have 4 home runs apiece. Walker's hitting $167 though, and Varsho is hitting .216. Looking at the matchups, we'll go down these one by one. Walker Buehler versus Merrill Kelly is the first one. Merrill Kelly thus far, 3 starts, just 1 earned run in 15 innings pitched, 18 strikeouts. But if you're looking for sort of a gambling angle maybe on this one, he has allowed 18 base runners in 15 innings. And so, yes, the ERA looks very good if you're Merrill Kelly, but I think the Dodgers can get to him. Last year against the Dodgers, 4 starts, 4 2/3, 10 hits, 4 earned runs, 6 1/3, 8 hits, 3 earned runs, 5 1/3, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 7 innings, 6 hits, 3 earned runs. So you look down, a lot of base runners the Dodgers put on the base pass against Merrill Kelly. He did allow, 12 earned runs across 4 starts. So Walker Buehler, a guy you've gotten stock down versus Merrill Kelly, a guy who has probably outperformed some of the peripherals. What do you like about Monday's game?
Well, because I feel like reading off those stats, maybe some of the Diamondbacks players are due.
Yeah.
And it just seems like when the Dodgers also play them at Chase Field that it's never really an easy series. Christian Walker, somebody who jumps to mind, who hits well against the Dodgers every time they play. Ketel Marte obviously has the potential to do so anytime.
Yeah.
And Merrill Kelly, we've seen him sort of give the Dodgers lineup fits, but I think like you highlighted, he's managed to pitch through some traffic so far. I'm not sure if that strategy went out as well for him against this Dodgers lineup, especially with Freddie Freeman kind of showing some power and Cody Bellinger coming off his 2 home run game. So that'd be interesting to see, and obviously I'll be interested to see how Buehler sort of responds to what a little bit of a inconsistent or underwhelming kind of average start to his season.
Yeah. Looking at the line for tonight, the Dodgers obviously heavy favorites, minus 190 on the money line. The total for the game is 9. So, I'm looking at Merrill Kelly. You're giving me stock down on Walker Buehler. I know Major League Baseball, if you've been tracking some of the betting stuff, overs have not done well. You're batting about 750 if you just play the under every single game because of the stuff. But who knows? You could sort of get the money line, maybe parlay that with a alternate total over 8, over 7.5 in the money line. Probably get you close to even money. That could be worth doing because I think the Dodgers are going to score a little bit tonight against Merrill Kelly. Again, I know 15 1/3, 1 earned run, 18 strikeouts. That's all good, but allowing a whip of 1.6 or whatever he's been at, 1.2, 1.3. The Dodgers are a team that can string some hits together and punish a guy like that. Game number 2, Tuesday, we've got Tony Gonsolin on the mound versus Zach Davies. Zach Davies, 3 starts thus far this season, 14 1/3 innings pitched. He's allowed 2 or more earned runs in all of those. Again, a guy that's allowed some traffic, 19 base runners in 14 1/3 innings, just 11 strikeouts. This is a guy that we're familiar with. He tops out in the mid-80s, and mid-80s might be generous. Sometimes it feels like the low 80s. And yet, Matt, do you remember he made 1 start against the Dodgers last season? Do you remember anything about that start?
I remember it not going very well for the Dodgers.
6 innings pitched, 0 hits allowed, and yet 5 walks. So 5 walks, no hits. He gets pulled because his pitch count was nasty. That was the only time he faced the Dodgers. Obviously, that's on one side. You got Tony Gonsolin on the other, coming off of the best start, I won't say of his career because he's had some good ones, but definitely of the last, stretch of his career, the last couple of seasons, the most promising start. So Gonsolin versus Davies. Do you think the Dodger bats get confused with the 83-mile-an-hour fastball of Zach Davies again?
Yeah, maybe. This one to me is kind of the biggest question mark game of the series, and a lot of it has to do with Gonsolin, at least for me with Gonsolin, because I don't out Joel or his capability to be a very good fourth starter for the team. We haven't seen any real semblance of consistency from him so far, and admittedly, it has been a young career so far. I think obviously it would be encouraging if he can build off his last start, together another good outing, and then maybe you feel like, okay, he could start to really get some traction here moving forward. But because we've kind of seen so much up and down with him, and Zach Davies, one way or another, has seemed to kind of, confuse the Dodgers lineup. This one, if the Dodgers were to lose a game in the series, I think the second one would be it.
I'm disappointed, Matt. You almost used the word flummox very well in a sentence, and you were like halfway through pronouncing it perfectly. You were using it in a great context, and you changed your mind.
Yeah, I caught between saying flummox or putting it in the past tense, and so then I just needed to clean that up very quickly.
Should have stuck with it. I am flummoxed as to why you did not use flummox there and stick with it. Yeah, I mean, look, the Davies thing, it's the most frustrating games in the world to watch because you're watching it and you're like, look, I don't think I can hit any major league pitching. I'd be terrified at anything over about 65 in a batting cage. So even 83-mile-an-hour changeups from Zach Davies, no thank you. But it's like, man, you watch guys like Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Chris Taylor go up there, and it's like, look, I get, it's easy to watch a guy swing through 101. You're like, yeah, you know what? That's tough. 83, I'm just like, good Lord, put the bat on the ball, get something. So they did draw 5 walks, so maybe they get to him this year. Last start, we got Julio Urias versus Zach Gallen. Gallen, 2 starts, 9 innings pitched, 1 earned run, 9 strikeouts, just 5 base runners allowed. So going the opposite direction. If there's a guy that I feel good about of these 3, I'd say Gallen would be the one. He had 3 straight years under 2.90 ERA heading into last year. Then he puts up a 4.30. So this is a guy that's also got a track record of putting it together. 3 starts against the Dodgers last year, 17 1/3 innings, 7 earned runs, 22 base runners, 20 strikeouts. So high strikeouts. There were some base runner issues for him last year. A pretty decent, solid ERA that probably puts him, 3 or 4, somewhere in that range. But Urias versus Gallen. We've talked a lot about Urias on the other side. Poor first start, kind of seems to have put it together. The velocity's not quite where you want it, but it's up about a mile an hour from where it was early in the year. How do you feel about this last one?
Yeah, definitely more confident, and a lot of that too is predicated on, I think, like I said, the middle game of the series is the one that's questionable for me. So if the Dodgers were to lose that, I think they're a veteran team who's shown obviously the ability. We just saw it against the Padres to sort of respond. Sure, okay, like game, but we're not going to lose this series.
Yeah.
Type thing. So I think that would be a factor. I think, like you just said, Urias is trending in the right direction for us. The velocity, I think, will get there eventually. At least we have started to see it increase and not necessarily hold at the diminished level it was to begin the year. Gallen, I think, has put together at least. I'd have to go back and really look at his starts. I know that there was at least one where I felt like he pitched pretty well against the Dodgers, but then they may have also gotten to him in that out of it. So.
Yeah. His last start against the Dodgers last year, 6 innings, 3 hits, 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts. That was just 2 weeks after a 5 1/3, 4-inning, 4 earned run game against the Dodgers. So those were sort of back to back. He had 6 innings, 5 hits, 2 earned runs earlier in the season, and then those were the 3. So basically, you look at that, you say he had one great start, the last one in the season in September 25th of last year. He was great. 2 weeks prior to that, he was not very good, and then July 30th of last year, he was very good. So I would say 2 out of 3 times he was good against the Dodgers. Okay, last one. We'll close out here with our typical predictions. I finally got one right. I think I predicted a 2 out of 3 against the Padres. So kudos to me for nailing that one. I'm going to go 2 out of 3 again for the Dodgers. I think they lose that Wednesday start. I think I like sort of the direction Gallen is headed in. And I think the Dodgers take the first 2, maybe let up the gas a tiny bit on Wednesday, looking ahead to the series against the Tigers. But I've got the Dodgers 2 out of 3 against the Diamondbacks. That day game, 12:40 game on a Wednesday. Weird stuff happens in those ones. So I'll give that one to the Diamondbacks.
I'm going to go with a sweep. And I know I expressed some questions and concerns with matchups and all that, but I think the Dodgers have momentum going into the series, so they take the series opener. I think they maybe start to sit on Zach Davies' changeup in the second game. And then at that point, if you've won 2 in a row, then you might as well finish your road trip on a positive note.
There you go. As I said, they come back Friday, Saturday, Sunday against the Tigers. Love seeing those weird matchups. Who knows what that will look like. As we said, the Tigers have not been good this season. Tyler Anderson, Clayton Kershaw, Walker Buehler, the probable starters for the Dodgers. The Tigers have not. They don't have a starter quite yet named for that Friday one as well. But we'll be going live on Friday after that Tigers game. So Tyler Anderson, former University of Oregon great, gets to start for the Dodgers. We'll be live after that one. That's Matt. My name's Jeff. As always, we appreciate you joining us here at DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. Whether you're checking us out on YouTube, click subscribe, ring the notification bell. Whether you're checking us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. Super helpful to us just to get some people in. Share with your friends. We're new on the podcast front, and we partnered with the Blue Wire Podcast Network, but we'd love to spread the word that we are there. I know some people are not YouTube people, they're podcast people. So if you've got Dodger fans in your life who are podcast people, make sure you spread the word. And as always, check out DodgerBlue.com for the latest news. Dodger Blue 1958 on social media as well. That's Matt. I'm Jeff. As always, take it easy.